Okay, we can start now. We are on page number 10 in our little paper there. And we start, as always, with the reading. And the reading is this time Revelation 22, 10 to 21.
I gotta get you ready to go, Dustin?
End of the New Testament. This too, it says here in the book of Revelation. Let's start here. 8. I, John, am the one who heard and saw these things. We don't know exactly who this John is. He's not the John who wrote the fourth gospel, as we thought for many centuries. When I had heard and seen them all, I knelt at the feet of the angel, which the angel usually does not like. One should kneel down only before God, who had shown them to me to worship him. But he said, don't do that. I am a servant just like you, and like your brothers, the prophets, and like those who treasure what you have written in this book. They are all finite people, and one should not kneel down before finite people. This is idolatry. It is God that you must worship. This too, he said to me, do not keep the prophets in this book a secret, the prophecies in this book a secret, because the time is close. That is what we call the eschatological reservation. And Thomas More is under this eschatological reservation. Meanwhile, let the sinner go on sinning, and the unclean continue to be unclean. Let those who do good go on doing good, and those who are holy continue to be holy. Very soon now I shall be with you again, bringing the reward to be given to every man according to what he deserves. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Happy are those who will have washed their robes clean, so that they will have the right to feed on the tree of life, which is for paradise, and can come through the gates into the city, which is the city of Jerusalem. These others must stay outside: dogs, fortune tellers, and fornicators, and murderers, and idolaters, and everyone of false speech and false life. This reminds us of Habermas, who talks about the successful life, or the missed life, which is the humanistic version of this. I, Jesus, that is the speaker here, the subject, have sent my angel to make these revelations to you for the sake of the churches. I am of David's line, of the empire paradigm of Judaism, the root of David, and the bright star of the morning. The Spirit and the bride say, come. Let everyone who listens answer, come. Then let all who are thirsty come. All who want it may have the water of life and have it free. This is my solemn warning to all who hear the prophecies in this book. If anyone adds anything to them, God will add to him every plague mentioned in the book. If anyone cuts anything out of the prophecies in this book, God will cut off his share of the tree of life and of the holy city, which are described in the book. The one who guarantees these revelations repeats his promise. I shall indeed be with you soon. Amen. Come, Lord Jesus. May the grace of the Lord Jesus be with you all. Amen. That is the last word of the New Testament. Okay, we made clear from the beginning that this is not what Thomas More is about. He is about a human effort, a human life. We have another guest with us, and we have a little paper for you too. Oh, I think I still have one. But what he writes is that, what Thomas More writes is, what are we supposed to do before that soon happens, before that eschatological event, this apocalyptic event happens. So that was our discourse. We have come to the end of our discourse. I'm on page 11 here, and I wrote it all down that we can carry it home. On Thomas More and his life and his major work, the Utopia. In the context of this and our own political situation, we started out with saying that we want to find out if Thomas could help us in the present transition period from the modernity to post-modernity. We started out with our own historical transition period, for modernity, postmodernity, which started in 1917 with the end of the First World War and continues today in 2009 with great speed. Now the humanists, and Thomas More was a humanist, said in Greek or in Latin, idou rhodos, idou kai bedema, or in Latin, hic rhodus, hic saltus, or in English, here is Rhodes, here jump, or here is the rose, here dance, would be a reinterpretation of it. If one does this, as for instance the great philosopher Hegel does it, it means here is the reason, here is providence, here you have to act. So we may remember our American image of Utopia, the Statue of Liberty, which comes from the Colossus of Rhodes. And Rhodes is not too far away from Patmos, where John had his visions. It is the high statue, the imitation, our Statue of Liberty is the imitation of the Colossus of Rhodes, and that is where the French got the idea from. And it is a high statue of Helios, the sun god, which from 280 to 224, before the Common Era, stood at the entrance to the harbor of Rhodes, near Patmos in Greece, and which was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The other 6 wonders are, and you know them all, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, which was then replaced by the Mariological dogma, the Artemis instead of the Artemis of Ephesus, we have then the Theotokos, the Mother of God, and then the statue of Zeus at Olympia, and the mausoleum of the Halicarnassus, and the lighthouse of Alexandria, and the pyramids of Giza. Today, in March 2009, the pyramids alone are left of the 7 wonders of the world. All the other wonders have disappeared. Greek workers had made a wonder out of war, which is symbolic for us, when they built the Colossus on the island of Rhodes in the Mediterranean Sea. An army had besieged the island's capital, but Rhodes resisted for a year, and the enemy army left. So the Rhodians transformed the enemy army's abandoned bronze and iron weapons and sold its siege equipment in order to make the Colossus, a 110-foot or 34 meters statue of the sun god Helios. By 280 BCE, the Colossus stood tall on a marble pedestal near the harbor of Rhodes until an earthquake toppled it just 56 years later. So the same way like this Colossus started at that harbor, so we put our Statue of Liberty at the harbor, before the harbor of New York. Rhodes tells us that we are, like Thomas More, the finite sons and daughters of our time. We cannot return to the Middle Ages, and that is a great temptation always in Catholicism. We have today Tridentine brothers who want to go back to the Tridentinum, the Trent Council, or to the First Vatican Council. On the other hand, we can also not go into the future, of course. We cannot be already in post-modernity. We can only be in that moment where we are. And if we had our discourse a few years earlier, a few years later, it would be a completely different discourse. But we can see objective trends in the present which come from the past and point toward future number 1, as we say all the time, the totally administered society, or alternative future number 2, the super militaristic society, or alternative future number 3, a humanistic society in which personal autonomy and universal solidarity will be reconciled. We chose the Christian and humanist Thomas and his Utopia so that he may help us to resist the trends toward alternative future number 1 and 2 and support the tendency toward alternative future number 3 through dealing realistically with the fundamental antagonisms of the present late capitalistic society, the contradictions between the religious and the secular, the right and the left, the individual and the collective, theory and praxis, or between the classes, the working class and the bourgeoisie. So that is what we did, and we have come to the conclusion today, and we want to go to our Roadhouse later on and celebrate our tremendous success. We go on with the time diagnosis and prognosis. First thing is I took a trip over the weekend and I visited our Mennonite brothers in Canada, and we discussed the nationalization or federalization of banks and industries as it is going on now, which is an important step in this transition period between modernity and post-modernity as capitalism comes to its end. The Mennonites know this, and they are very worried about their farms and their small businesses. And so we had to explain to them that, of course, the crash of banks and big business may not mean anything for the small business people or for the farmers. The Mennonites are particularly in the low bourgeoisie, as this is called, or the low middle class. Joe the plumber. They are all Joe the plumber. They express petit bourgeois interests and feelings and sentiments. And the Joe the plumbers and the Mennonites too, we had a Mennonite scholar there who had just written a book, and he gave it to me, about the socialist theologian Tillich on one side, and on the other side the fascist theologian Hirsch. He was my student, and already 30 years ago I warned him that these two things do not go together. And I could not understand why in God's name he had to write a book in which this fascist Hirsch was in there. So then I said, well, you wrote a new one in 2004. Yes, he said it was about Tillich. I said, did you sneak that Hirsch into it again? No, he said, just a little bit. Then I looked it up, and half of the chapters are about Hirsch. So why does this wonderful Mennonite brother of mine always get hooked with this theologian Hirsch, the fascist? The reason for that is the group to which he belongs. The way we think is very much dependent on the class to which we belong. We think maybe that our thinking is very individualistic and unique or so, but the class is always conditioning us. So even if one is a sociologist and one has the sociology of sociology, is the question, which class does this guy come from, and which class does this sociology come from? That means, for which class is it apologetical? Which class does it defend? For which class does it harmonize? For which class does it lie from the morning to the night? That is the issue. So if we want to ask why my friend 30 years ago, when he was my student, I warned him and to leave that Hirsch out, and 30 years later he can still not keep that Hirsch out, that means there is something in his class environment which makes him always hang on to this. And the reason why that fascism is so much rooted in the low middle class, in the petit bourgeoisie, in the Joe the plumbers, is that they are threatened from below by the labor unions and from above by the big chains and by big business. So they are frightened. When we started to tell them, that they come from the Middle Ages, and added the little word low bourgeoisie to it, and their eyes got bigger and bigger, but one cannot help it. So the low bourgeoisie is a leftover of the burghers in the cities, the blacksmith and so on, and they have somehow found their way into modernity. In a certain sense, they may even be the starting point of the modernity. As a matter of fact, it was the low bourgeoisie which marched from Marseille to Paris and then attacked the palace and so on. So it was the low bourgeoisie which pushed the execution, the guillotining of the king and of the woman from Austria and of the little Dauphin and so on. So they come from the Middle Ages, but they were then overcome already in the National Assembly in Paris by the middle bourgeoisie and by the high bourgeoisie of bankers and industrialists. That is the high bourgeoisie. So they asked us, it seemed that the Mennonites had no real feeling of who was above them. So if they are the bourgeoisie, the low bourgeoisie, who is the middle bourgeoisie and who is the high bourgeoisie? So these are the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the Thyssen's and the Krupps. When you look at the elevator, you'll see they're probably Thyssen written there, or Krupp or whatever. They are international, and they survived fascism. They paid Hitler. Hitler was their employee. They drop the employee and then go up and find new employees. They're always low bourgeois people who sell themselves to the high bourgeoisie in order to do their dirty work. So that was a very interesting visit to Canada. I also visited my first grandchild who is now 25, and I have a little grandchild who is just 1 year old. So we have just a big span. And the little one is called Grace Margaret, and she is the little dot at the end of the whole development, of which Megan is the beginning. So, and it was a horrible stormy weather, and fog and night, and mad Canadians running on this Highway 4 or 0041 or whatever, without any speed limit or any signals in any direction whatsoever. It was just horrifying. So, but we made it. Okay, so this, our question is then, when we look at this experience, the question is, where does this objective tendency, not the subject what people think or whatever, not even what a Bush thinks or what an Obama thinks, but the objective tendency, where does it point to? Toward alternative future number 1, fascism, or alternative future number 3, humanistic socialism? Can Thomas help us to decide and to act with his utopia? That was our theme here, really. Then there is another issue. Wherever you have some questions or what, please stop me. We want to make it as much a discourse as possible. Now, last week, President Obama supported the stem cell research. So our time analysis or time diagnosis or time prognosis holds on to little events which take place, and it's important for our discourse that we sharpen our eyes for these little events which other people may just forget or pass over. Now, this means, of course, that the secularization has won another step. That means the secularization cannot be stopped. No matter what religious people think or do, they thought that the Bush administration would help them and would oppose stem cell research. The President did it, President Bush did it to some extent by only using embryos which would be discarded anyway. And, but at the same time, when he opposed stem cell research to some extent, his party, the Republican Party, spent millions and millions of dollars in California in order to promote it. And if it was not done in this country, it would be done in another country. So this is what religious people must be aware of. They may think that they have a candidate for the presidency who, in order to get votes, promises them that he will carry through their agenda, but they will always be deceived, because this is a secular office, and the secular office of the president cannot promote a religious agenda. And this is not a religious country, this is not a Christian country, it never was. And if Jefferson said that the Americans must read the Bible, then he said that because then we can govern them better. And that is a functionalization and ideologization of religion, which a religious person can never accept. Which a bourgeois who is always ambiguous about religion can maybe think it's a good thing, but certainly not a person who follows Moses or follows Abraham or Muhammad or Jesus or whatever would consider this as an absolute abuse of religion for completely non-religious purposes. So while the Christian right and the millions of Catholics and evangelicals voted for this war president twice, when then was a state election, then they had found out that they had been cheated once more, and they were disappointed. And this disappointment will go on forever and ever, as long as these people live under the illusion that we are in somewhat not a secular but another type of a religious type of a society. So, and for us it's important then, as far as the Obama step is concerned, Obama never promised that he would stop stem cell research. As a matter of fact, he did the opposite. And there were bishops in Pennsylvania and elsewhere who said whoever votes for Obama will go to hell. And that was exactly the reason, because he did not make these promises. He was too honest to make these promises and hook religious people, and then afterwards knows very well that he cannot possibly fulfill the religious agenda because we are a secular state. The first secular state, as a matter of fact, a great experiment still up to the day, long before there were socialistic secular states. We were a bourgeois secular state. We made this experiment the first time, even before the French. and we should be proud of it. So, nevertheless, the issue is now that the secularization is unstoppable, that science wins over religion, has won over religion once more, that the whole society does not rest on mythological foundations anymore, but then silently, without the masses noticing it, they have substituted the mythology and religion by science and technology. And so that is what steers the daily discourse, the public discourse, and the private discourse as well. No matter if this is stem cell research or birth control or whatever. Jews, Christians, Muslims, they may all be believers, but when you look how many children they have exactly 2.1 children. And nothing more and very often nothing less. So that is the result of the fact that the bourgeois power elite put the masses on the pill in the 60s for $10 million, and now they're on the pill and we have zero population, and everybody replaces himself once. That means 2 children. And in my family, that's a very funny thing. My children, I have 7 children who survived, and so they have exactly 14 children. I have 14 grandchildren. That's exactly what they have to do, what they had to do. And it's exactly independently of the subjective and private decisions which they make, that one decided not to get married, that another one decided to have 3 children, another one decided to have 2 children. In the end, it's 14. Mathematically an exact Malthusian formula. And so all over the place. When you look from family to family, you'll see the grandparents, great-grandparents still had 4 children, 5 children, 6 children, 12 children, whatever. And then in the 60s, the thing is then, or because Malthus did not work, because of chastity is a hard thing. So when they put it on mechanics, it worked then wonderfully now. Okay, so the question for us is again, can Thomas help us in this? Thomas is not only a humanist and a Christian, but also a very realistic person. So if you look, for instance, what he says about the same questions, about overpopulation and so on, he would, of course, not think of birth control, but he would think of something, namely of colonization. That means send people into the colonies. Or when the population goes down again, to bring people back from the colonies, and so on. So the whole Utopia is full of lawyers' insights and very realistic insights in problems. Euthanasia, for instance, where we would shy away from it. Dr. Corkian here in Michigan, who was in prison for that. Thomas would not simply reject this, but would say, if somebody gets really ill and it is really painful, he should starve himself to death. But voluntarily, he says, and nobody else can kill him. But voluntarily, people can very well help somebody to eat less and less, and thereby put the end to his life and to his suffering and so on. So Thomas had no problems with that. So, and we can look into some of the things later on if you want to. Okay, so these were the 2 contemporary issues. If you have another one, then we can analyze this. There's always, to diagnose it, and then also to have a prognosis. So if we look at Obama, what he's doing, then we'll see that he step by step promotes the secularization, which also went on under Bush 1 and Bush 2 and under Reagan and so on, but there it was hidden by lies, by ideologies and so on, while the Roosevelt liberals are much more open about these things, as we have seen. So both parties are totally secular, but one party uses religion a little bit more than the other in order to make people more governable. So this has nothing to do with genuine type of religion. They're both liberal parties. Liberalism was religious originally. It comes from the Presbyterian right-wing Protestantism, but it is totally secularized already since the 19th century, that nobody can even remember anymore that it was religious once. And it is as individualistic as Protestantism is. So it inherited the atomistic character from Protestantism, but nothing else. Maybe Protestant ethics or so, but that has also been dropped in the meantime. People do not work hard because of the Protestant ethics, but because they will glide into the slums if they don't work hard. That means the system has become its own ideology, and it does not need any Presbyterians or Catholics or anybody else anymore to motivate people. Okay, any question about this? So we can give the prognosis that this cannot be stopped, the secularization process, the profanization process. And so the question is then, with Thomas, if we can give an answer to this, and we can just make that short, if really religion contributed to the humanization of man in the last 6,000 years or so, we separated from chimpanzees 7 million years ago, but what we have around here, that is the product of the last 6,000 or 7,000 years. That means that is the Euphrates Tigris culture, where we got our religion from, and that is the Egyptian, the Nile culture, it's the Indus culture, and the Yellow River culture. They all go back to 6,000, 7,000 years, and whatever we have, chairs, writing, reading, and so on, all comes from there. And there were long stretches of time where people obviously only slept or whatever, and just went on living in Africa or elsewhere. So therefore this, and this is of course a very young, that means if we take the whole lifespan of the human species, then all what is standing around here is a product of the last second of this time. So it is a very recent, and that is true for the religions too, even what we call old religions, the different Hinduisms and so on are relatively young, and Islam is a very newcomer, and so is Christianity. So there were many, many other religions before who died out because they could not solve a certain problem, which we mentioned here in the movie there, the theodicy problem. They could not give an answer to the question of meaning at a certain point, and then they were forgotten and were not taught to the next generation, and that was the end of it. I don't have any paper there anymore for you. Maybe Walter can help you out. Okay, do we have any other contemporary issue which we should or could analyze? Just want to see the method, how one is doing this. Any question about what we said so far? Anything coming to your mind? Okay, now then we want to go over to our little book, which our discourse was about. It is divided up into different chapters. As a matter of fact, 9 chapters. I don't know who read it, or if you have the time to look into it. So the first one is on the country and its agriculture, and these titles say something to us. Maybe we can just read 1 or 2 sentences of each of the chapters, but the title says already something. Obviously, Thomas thinks of a society which is based in agriculture. Now, agriculture, and what he means is south of the equator, where these islands are, where these utopians live, where this utopia took place. So it is far away from England, down south, and there is the equator, and that is a very desolate area, but then when you go deeper south, then you come to a very cultivated area. So he moves it in space far away. He doesn't move it in time so much, but rather in space. And so the base is agriculture. We have agriculture since about 10,000 years. And so then we have also the development of villages. And that means that is also the beginning of work in the present sense. That means plants had to be cultivated, animals were cultivated, one did not simply go hunting or fishing or whatever, but real work started. So the fisherman's just sitting there with the weights until the poor little fish is stupid enough to get hooked, but not real work. So, but when you have agriculture, then you have to be disciplined. And a very ugly phenomenon which goes through the whole history of Christianity and other religions too is, for instance, anti-Semitism. And this anti-Semitism or anti-Judaism shows us what that meant, or what this agriculture and the invention of work really meant. Because it may very well be that that it was the refusal of the Hebrews to become agriculturalists, to be integrated in the Babylonian or into the Egyptian culture, which made them into such objects of hate through the centuries. That may be the fundamental motif, and then we have the variations of that same motif. That means on one side there are the people who along the Nile River and along the Euphrates and Tigris had to work hard, and these Hebrews, they went through, and other Semites went through with their camels and with their sheep, and seemed to do nothing really, just walking around, dropping things, letting the wind take care of it, and so on. And so they looked then as people who did not have to work, who lived a paradisical type of a life, which was of course not true, but it looked like, to the people who had to work so hard, it looked like paradise. And we have something of this nomadic thing with us when people take a little wagon and go from one camping place in summer to the other, or when some people have to work hard and others can travel, then a certain envy develops against them. And it seems that there was anti-Semitism in Egypt and anti-Semitism in Babylon and in Rome. We had the Stoic Emperor Hadrian, who met a Jew on the street, and the Jew greeted him deeply, and he said, "How can this damned Jew dare to greet the emperor?" And then came another Jew, and he just passed by, and he said, "How can this damned Jew dare not to greet the emperor?" and so on. So a very irrational type of a force, this anti-Semitism. So we have to dig what it really is, and it is this wandering Jew who is wandering from place to place and does not bow under this law of agriculture, or this law of labor and work and so on. And then added to this are then, of course, the religious thing, that suddenly Abraham has this vision in Ur, not too far away from Baghdad, of this henotheism. That means one God, and the other gods are still valid somehow. The wives of Abraham still have house gods and goddesses, and they are obviously tolerated, and they are also still powerful. And so only very slowly is this henotheism moved into monotheism, and with Moses then we have the real breakthrough of this, and this may be related to Egypt, to Aneknaton and Nefertate, whom you have in the museum in Chicago, who suddenly produced monotheism, for which even the god Helios, whom we have just mentioned, was suddenly the sun became, the sun disk was not a god himself, but he just became a symbol of the divinity. So real monotheism was developed, and it's possible that Moses was an Egyptian and inherited it from Aneknaton. It was a similar time, and that it was combined together with a volcano type of a god in Midian, and so that this combination then established the Hebrew religion from Moses on, and lost more and more the volcanic character, was more and more demonized, and so the monotheism became pure and pure. But already in Egypt it produces great opposition, because there are no images anymore, there are no names, you cannot see anything, the god is invisible. That means the senses played less and less a role. If you went to Athens, for instance, you would see the god standing outside of the temple, and so you had something which you could really see. And when then St. Paul came to Athens, he went to the Areopag and discussed with the Stoics and others, and so he was accepted first. He started out very nicely with a captatio benevolentia, rhetorical beginning, and said, "You are ois epioi, you are so pious people. I saw all these gods," which was a damned lie, because he thought they were idolatrous, really. Jews can believe only through the ear, not through the eyes, so he really didn't see a thing, but he just wanted to make good small talk in order to get the guys on his side and convert a few of them. But they looked through the whole thing, so when he just came to the resurrection, that Jesus was resurrected and so on, then that was too much for them, because the whole life was supposed to end so that your soul would be liberated and would be with the wonderful ideas of truth and beauty and so on. Even homosexuality was related to this. And now suddenly somebody said that the body would also survive, and so he said just stop it, and so we'll hear you another time. And probably there was no convert whatsoever. And the University of Athens had no converts up to 476 when it was closed by Theodosius, the emperor, and by force. And up to then, nobody had converted to Christianity. Because of the text, the Greek text was Koine Greek, Proletarian Greek, which the professors despised. And then there was this thing with the resurrection. And then also the other thing where Paul deceived them was, I saw the altar when I came to Athens, and the altar was dedicated to the Theon Agnoton, the unknown God. And I have come to bring you the unknown God. That means Christianity takes the God out of his distance and brings him closer to people, because the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God, and everything was created in the Logos, and the Logos became flesh. This, he became flesh, means to bring God very close, and that is where Christianity is superior to Judaism, but at the same time pays a high price for it, namely the possibility of idolatry in terms of saints and of Jesus himself. That means in terms of a vulgar type of deification of Jesus. So instead of that the God creates himself an image which brings him close to us, that, and so modern people see it, that the Christians deified Jesus and made him into a God, and then they would say that Christianity is a connection between Jewish monotheism and Greek polytheism. But monotheism is usually not popular. Civil society, as Max Weber would say, is polytheistic. And what shocks so many people is that in this country the real religion was really capitalism, and now capitalism is crashing and the gods are falling, the fetishism, which Marx called the market fetishism or commodity fetishism. And so this is an unbelievably deep transformation through which we are going at this moment, and it is only the beginning of it. So as far as we could say, that what makes Christianity superior to Judaism is the emphasis on no fear. You have that from the first gospel to the book of Revelation. Don't be afraid. I am the beginning and the end. Don't be afraid. There's no fear. Is something which has to do with the closeness of God in people's life, and then the issue of grace. That means we are acceptable by God, we are accepted, in spite of the fact that we are not acceptable because we are those fornicators, those fortune tellers and all this. But we are accepted nevertheless, in spite of the fact that we are unacceptable, which, by the way, in the book of Revelation does not come through, because it is a very, very Jewish book from the very beginning to the end. So, but nevertheless, there's no fear and this grace to be accepted in spite of the fact that we are not acceptable, and all what we have to do is to accept our acceptance. And then the issue of love, that in a certain sense, love swallows up the law. Now, there are some qualifications. The followers of John the Baptist were antinomists. That means they thought the kingdom was there and therefore the law had disappeared. But in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus, another disciple of John the Baptist, made clear that the kingdom is not yet here, and that the law is valid, and even radicalizes the law. The old people said you should not kill. I tell you, whoever says you terrorist has already killed him in his heart. The old people said don't commit adultery. Whoever looks at a woman the wrong way and desires her has already broken the law. And the old people said keep the law, keep the oath. I tell you, say yes, yes, no, no. And whatever is more than this is from the evil one, from Satan. And apropos Christian country, as we said already, Obama just put his hand on the Bible of Lincoln and he took a holy oath, twice even, he took it twice, and in spite of the fact that inside it said that it is satanic to do so, that is a Christian country. And we do it in every courtroom, every day. So and then the old people said eye for eye, tooth for tooth, and we discussed here this issue which is still going on. The woman who were blinded by her lover, former lover, and now wants to have him blinded and so on. And so far in Iran I haven't heard anything if she has in the meantime changed that eye for eye, tooth for tooth or whatever, or if she wants to have 2 eyes for her 2 eyes. And there is a possibility in the Sharia to forgive, and so the court leaves it to her. If she wants to forgive him, then he will not lose his eyes. If she sticks to the lex talionis, he will lose his eyes, and I think maybe has lost them already. So, and then the last one, the old people said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. That is a false translation or a false quotation. The Torah never said, hate your enemy. It said, there was a saying, an Aramaic saying, which is not in the Torah either, which says, your enemy you don't have to love, but you don't have to hate him either. So love your neighbor, and then love the stranger. Now that is also in the Torah. Remember, take care of the stranger. Remember, you yourself have been strangers in Egypt. Is a very important sentence in the Jewish community. But then it goes further to the love of the enemy, even to take, the issue is to love the other because he is me. So even the enemy with whom I can get along, I must remember that he is me. This Saddam Hussein, he is me. This enemy, this terrorist, he is me. So that is the fifth of Jesus' laws. And so we could say that love, no fear, grace, and these elements are already present in Judaism. There is maybe 1 or 2% in the Sermon on the Mount which are specific Jesuanic. All the other things are Jewish. Every rabbi knows this. So, but what we can say is that Christianity made these elements, which are already there in the covenants, in the covenant with Noah, in the covenant with Abraham, and the covenant with Moses. These elements were present, but what Jesus did in this community was to make it thematic, to make them a theme, and put them into the forefront of the teaching. And that is then why Jesus is said to have created a religion of love and so on. But as far as love and the law is concerned, we have to qualify it. Love does not swallow up completely the law. But Paul Tillich, whom I mentioned before, was the great Protestant theologian who would say with Augustine, love and do what you want. Whenever you can, when you love, you cannot possibly do anything wrong. And we can put this together with the golden rule, in which also the law of love is integrated. Treat the others in such a way as you would like to be treated. Not like they really treat you, but like you would like to be treated. So, so love then would be part of this element of this golden rule. And so the important is with discussion with Jewish brothers, and I think with Islamic brothers in a certain sense too, that the question is what in religion becomes thematic, and in Judaism it is the sublimity of God, the total transcendence, which is no longer which is taken for granted in Islam then, but it is the law which is made thematic, maybe more so than in Judaism. So each religion has certain elements which were there before already, but which had not been made thematic. They had not become the main theme of this religion yet. Okay. Okay, so nevertheless, back to our first chapter there of the Utopia, that is the agriculture thing. And Thomas wants to have everybody to work on a farm, at least for a little while. That is one of his, not his ideas. These are the utopians. The utopians have this idea. So it is not entirely clear to what extent the utopians always express the author's position. The author distances himself a little bit and questions, in a certain sense, the utopians. But we can nevertheless say that probably the utopians express what Thomas would have liked, what he would have preferred, but with some qualification, because he's quite a legal mind and he doesn't want to be caught. So therefore he doesn't express his own opinion, but he puts them into the mouth of these utopians there. So and that is the whole organization of work. He thinks that people should work 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon. And there is the question, of course, for a good British guy, is that really enough? Can one feed the whole society with just working 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon? And so I had this experience in the kibbutzim in Israel, who also limit their working hours amazingly, or they would say we could, produce 1,000 windows a week, but we produce only 500, and so that we have enough time for photography and for painting pictures and playing the piano and for developing dancing and taking walks and swimming and so on and so on. So while capitalism, wants to get out of things as much as possible, if you can really produce. If you have the productive force to produce 1,000 windows, you will have to produce 1,000 windows, because what your real value is the maximization of profit and not the realization of the human being and the human potential. So this is the capitalist is an extreme having person, as Fromm says. We have a Fromm specialist here, and the other one is the being person. If you push the having person to the extreme, then you have a nut, you have insanity, and that is why the society is so insane, including the traffic there on the roads. I drove alone there from Detroit, Karen went with her husband, and then I drove back, and right away I just entered the highway and there was a huge accident there. 3 ambulances, 3 fire engines, and the parts of the cars were laying for a whole mile all over the place, These horrible contingencies, you could say, absolute contingencies without any providence whatsoever. That means without a reason whatsoever. And so I sneaked ahead of the whole group. Then I drove with an insane speed myself home, and in rain and fog, and the trucks come, and when you are behind a truck, you cannot see anything for 5 minutes, so you just drive into nirvana there. And so this is all insane. There is no reason or rationality for that speed. They don't go anywhere. They don't go anywhere. If they would come home to Chicago 3 hours later, it wouldn't matter at all. And so, but they must run. So this is an insane society. And if you go to the extreme of being, then you would be a saint. But most people are somewhere in between. That means half saintly and half insane. And that is what Chicago or what Detroit and Toronto and all look like. Okay, so for us the question is, to what extent the chapters there can be perspectives by which we can approach where we are in this society. That means perspectives which can show us what is important, what to look for, what to ask for. And so this first chapter on the country, that means its geography and so on, which is important, the bigness of the country, this, going on and on and on. In Canada, you can go up to Alaska and whatever. This unbelievable space, which was not the case with the utopians. They had a limited type of a space, and which, like Switzerland or whatever. So the question is, in a huge territorial state like this one, does Utopia really fit, and not only the tremendous space, but also tremendous population, 300,000, 300 million people or whatever, And in Toronto, you can hardly move, And then nobody knows where they are. So we asked, for instance, some people where that street is where we want to go, and they pointed in the opposite direction, so that we were close already and went in the other direction. That means the guy, the Canadian, was there, and he had a Canadian dialect. He was not a stranger. So, and he tells us the exact opposite. That means he didn't even know where he was. And he had music in his ears, so he had to shout at him that he would hear anything at all, because everybody in this narcissistic state there listens to his own melody and walks and doesn't know where he is. I mean, this is like a state hospital up there. And since they're all like this, therefore nobody notices that they're in the state hospital. They all think they're normal. Okay, so this as far as number one. Then number two, on the cities, and especially Amororte. Well, that's the capital of the whole thing. Somehow these people down there in the equator, they had some connection with Latin or Greek. Where they got this from is not entirely clear, except that the humanists spoke Latin and Greek. So, as I said before, I have this other thing before which I quoted in Latin and Greek and so on. So, and some of these names, city names, sound like Greek, or they sound like Latin and so on. So, nevertheless, in this utopia, we do not only have agriculture, but since about 3,000 years we have city-states. And so this utopia consists of villages, and it consists of city-states, which have certain magistrates, which is the next chapter. And so that means also, and that's an interesting thing, because at a certain point in the city-state, the civil society developed between the family and the state. And this civil society is the problem, because all city-states died from civil society, including we ourselves. The problem which you have now is that civil society was deregulated by the state and is in the process of committing suicide. So it has to be controlled by the state, and therefore the question is, how does that happen with Thomas? How does he solve this problem? And the state, the magistrates, the president, the senate, and so on, are very much regulating things all the time, so that a real free, liberal civil society does not even develop. We know that, for instance, the Soviet experience was a very Platonic experience, because you have in Plato, whom they read, by the way, too, there in the island, in Plato, Plato is the attempt to rescue Athens from its own civil society. That is why he is against a certain form of music, because that music elevates the bourgeois type, the selfish type, the egomaniac, the narcissistic type. So therefore he is against music, he is against poetry. Lyrics in general emphasize the individual and so on. But Plato failed. He took a sophist, Socrates, and sophists, lawyers and so on, are the representative of civil society. That's why you have this unbelievable number of lawyers, and everybody sues everybody. I cannot take my students home to my apartment because the registrar is afraid to be sued. When somebody like Walter falls down my staircases, then he will have to pay for it and so on. So, and this is against the atmosphere. The hospitals, you have the same thing. People are afraid of malpractice suits and so on. So whole armies of lawyers everywhere, that is characteristic for a civil society. So then and they are sophists, that means they have lost all sense for objective trends or whatever, and they construct everything in their head and think that these constructions are the same thing like the objective trends. So in Bush you have that, on one side that bourgeois with this construct of liberalism in his head, and there was not more in it than that, and then suddenly comes something outside the objective tendency of capital suddenly, and he says, I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it, and then he begins to